Hi everyone, thanks for joining. We're just going to leave it a couple of minutes to let people join the call and then we'll get going. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for choosing to join us today as part of the Joe to Joti. My name's Matt Larson-Dorr, and I'm joined by my colleague Anna, and we're both from WWF, me in the UK and Anna from Portugal. And we're here to talk to you today about a really important piece of work that WWF has just done, our Living Planet report, and what it means for us as people, as scouts, as for you as young people especially. So I'm going to share my screen and talk you through a little bit of this. So please do, if you have any questions as we're talking, just post them as you think of them in the Q&A tab. I'm sure you're familiar with that as all of these Joe to Joti sessions are underway. And we'll try and get through as many as possible, either when the time seems right or at the end. And if there's things which we didn't say, which you wish we had, feel free to ask questions that don't directly relate to what we've said, because of course you might have come hoping to hear something from WWF that we don't cover. So the piece of work that I mentioned is our Living Planet report. And if you've seen the newspapers and some of the sort of television news over the last couple of days, you might have seen something about this. It's a global report that WWF brings out every 2 years, and it's really important because it basically says how the world is doing, how the natural world is doing. And it's not normally good news. It comes out every 2 years, and every 2 years it kind of shows that we have damaged the natural world a bit more. But the report isn't just bringing bad news, it's also helping us to understand why that is and what we can do about it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, the Living Planet report is brought out by WWF, but we also work with some partners, and the main one is ZSL, which is the Zoological Society of London. It sounds like they're very UK based, but although they run some really big conservation centres in the UK, London Zoo being one of them, they also work all around the world. There's a network of scientists who are studying the natural world, wildlife populations all around the world. So they're really important partners. And they run something called the LPI, the Living Planet Index, which is what the Living Planet report is kind of talking through. So a few terms that I'm going to use today, and Anna might use some of these as well. So it's really important that we understand them. The first is biodiversity. And it sounds like a really technical scientific term, although I'm sure that many of you use it already. And it means all the different living things in one area. So you could be talking about the biodiversity of your garden, or you could be talking about the biodiversity of a country or of the whole world. But it's always it means all of the living things there and how varied they are. And then we'll also probably talk about ecosystems. And ecosystems is all of those living things, but also their environment. So the geography, the kind of landscape in which they live, and factors like the weather and the climate, and how the living things interact with each other and with their environment. So it's about relationships between things as much as it is about what's actually there. So if you think about the jobs associated with these words, if you study biodiversity, you're a biologist, and that kind of means you understand how living things work, or you might know, for example, what a human body looks like inside and how it works. If you're an ecologist, you study ecosystems, you study the relationship between things, and you can understand kind of what's happening in a whole landscape that's good or bad for the different living things in it. So ecologists are very, very important to WWF's work because we need to understand what's happening in the natural world so that we can work out how to help it. And biodiversity is an important part of that because the more biodiversity there is in an ecosystem, the more resilient it is. If you think about it as having lots of different pieces of string joining lots of animals, plants, and different parts of the landscape, if you take one of those things out, it kind of breaks some of those connections because they're all connected in this ecosystem. If you have lots and lots and lots of them, then overall, if you take one thing out, the rest of the ecosystem, it just kind of manages. It doesn't change that much. If you've only got a few things, taking one of them out makes a really big difference and can break really important connections and lead to problems for everything in that ecosystem. So that's why we're talking about those key terms. And there's another really important distinction because I'm going to tell you the main statistic from the Living Planet report, which is one of the big things that we talk about in the news at the moment. The Living Planet report only came out yesterday, by the way, if I wasn't clear. One is species, which I'm sure you know means organisms that all share the same characteristics and genes. So we are all humans, no matter where in the world we're from, whatever culture we're from, we're all human species. And populations means groups of that same species in one particular place. So when I talk about populations, I don't mean the global population of something, I mean a population. So for example, in this case, the wildebeest that are living in that particular landscape in the picture. So that will all make sense when I tell you how the Living Planet report works. So I mentioned the Living Planet Index, which is what ZSL, our partners, study. So this is just to get across what that actually is in practice. And it's studying our planet at the natural world level using lots of different techniques. So you can see around this diagram the various different things that are used to study the natural world. There's satellite imagery, so looking down from space and being able to see the signs of where wildlife populations are living. One fact for you is you can see where emperor penguin colonies, they're the biggest penguin in the Antarctic, you can see where their colonies are or have been because they leave big pink stains because that's the color of their poo. So there's things that you can look at from space that are really important ways of studying where wildlife is and how much of it there is. But there's a lot that's on the ground. A lot of it's out in landscape. So tagging lions and jaguars so that you can see where they go and where those where other jaguars meet and so on. Camera traps all around habitats, taking pictures when things pass by so you can see that they're there. And literally going out and just finding what's there with a pair of binoculars and a notepad. And scientists all around the world are studying what's going on in their local habitats, their local landscapes, and feeding that into the Living Planet Index. And so they can see when one year there's a certain number of animals in a landscape, and then the next year if that's gone down or up. And that's the change in that population size. And that's what the LPI shows. And the stat from the Living Planet report this year is that, on average, those populations that are being studied have shrunk by 69% since 1970. And we talk about 1970 simply because that's when we started gathering the data for the Living Planet Index. So if you imagine that your scout troop has shrunk by 69%, so that's half of them gone and then some extra ones gone as well. That's how much the population size has shrunk on average. And that's not representative of all populations. Some will have gone up. So the fact that the average is this huge drop in size means that we have lost a lot of nature, a lot of wild from our world. And WWF and our partners are really focused on what we can do about this, because we know there's different paths ahead. One path is that we just carry on as we are, causing these problems that are making wildlife populations shrink, and we continue to lose more and more of the natural world. It carries on declining. If we can just do lots of conservation work, maybe, and protect habitats, we might be able to keep things at this level. But we don't want things to be at this level, because we have lost so much over the last 50 years that this is not a very healthy planet that we're living on. So we actually want to restore nature. So we call that bending the curve, that it's gone down, 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 down. We don't just want to stop it going down, we want to bring it back up and have more nature than we have today. And when we talk about biodiversity and when we talk about nature, it might seem like, well, that's nice. I love wildlife, or you might not, care that much about wildlife, although I bet most of you do. And actually, the big problem facing us right now is climate change. We hear a lot about climate change and how countries have to start, changing the way they do things so that they are burning less carbon and putting less carbon in the atmosphere to stop global temperatures getting warmer and all the problems that causes, like rising sea levels. And it's true, it's really important. But actually, when we talk about protecting nature, we are talking about the same thing. So climate change and biodiversity are really, really linked. So this diagram just shows, as simply as possible, really, what I mean by that. So at the top, you've got all of those wonderful ecosystems. You've got the jungle, you've got the ocean, and you can see there's human activities that are damaging those ecosystems. Now, those ecosystems are really, really important for actually keeping the climate healthy and stable. And so I've got forests and oceans there. If those forests and oceans become less healthy because we've taken away a lot of the wildlife or we've damaged it, they can't do as much to draw carbon down from the atmosphere, and therefore climate change actually gets worse. So we have to fix the problem with the loss of nature. Otherwise, we can't fix the problem of climate change. So that's why those two things come together. So I'm sure you'll know the science behind some of this, but forests are incredibly important because every tree in a huge forest is photosynthesizing, it's drawing carbon out of the air and turning it into wood and locking some of it down in the soil through its roots. And if the forests become smaller, or if they become less healthy, the trees aren't doing so well, and the soil isn't as good quality, then they just can't do that as much. People are less familiar with what oceans do, but oceans are even more important than forests. We get more carbon taken out of the atmosphere and more oxygen put back in by oceans than we do from forests. And that's mainly because they're so big. But when you look at a big expanse of ocean, it just looks like a blue desert, like just a big expanse of water. But you've got to remember there's a lot going on beneath the surface. And when you look at that expanse of water, you're actually looking at a forest, because in the top few inches of water, where the sunlight is still bright and the water's a bit warmer, there are just every square inch of that has millions of tiny, tiny organisms in, tiny, tiny little living things. And a lot of them are plants, photoplankton, we call them, so phytoplankton. And so if you think about a huge area of ocean and all of that surface water being filled with tiny plants, and they're all doing what trees do, they're all taking carbon and releasing oxygen, then the oceans are doing a huge amount. And all of the other living things in the ocean help keep it going. So there's krill, there's tiny little creatures, tiny little animals that graze on the phytoplankton. And so they lock that carbon that's been taken out of the atmosphere and then turned into little plants. They lock that into their own bodies, and then they send it down to the bottom in their poo, or in some cases they get eaten by other bigger things, and then that eventually ends up on the ocean bottom as well. So everything gets locked in by the ocean, and that's a really important process if we want to help a stable climate. And it only happens if we've got all of that biodiversity, all of those different living things. And climate is affecting nature. It goes both ways. This is a flying fox bat, and it's just brought up as a rather sad example, just to remind us that climate change is bad for wildlife as well as bad for us. During a heat wave in Australia in 2018, about 23,000 flying fox bats died just over 2 days, just from being too hot to function. They just dropped from the sky, dropped from the trees. And that just 2 days of high heat reduced the country's population by about a third. So, you know, as climate change makes extreme weather more frequent, that's going to make it harder for us to look after our natural world. So again, we need to look after those two problems at the same time. And so what the Living Planet report says, and I'm going to come back to it after Anna has told you a bit about one particular part of the natural world. We look at the problems that we're currently facing and what's causing them, what's causing this decline in nature, and then we look at what we actually need to do about it. And so if you look on the left of this slide, it's talking about, you know, the problems that we have. We've got climate change, yes. We've got pollution in the ocean, plastic bags and non-recyclable plastic ending up in the ocean. We've got the destruction of habitat there, and we've got what we call the fragmentation of habitat, where we put roads in and they don't seem to take up very much space, but they're actually cutting up like a forest or a grassland into two smaller habitats, and that's not good news for things like tigers that need just to be able to roam over a large area to hunt. And what we need to do is we need to shape a new future. We need to turn it into a future that is good for the climate. So we're not contributing to climate change, but also we've restored the natural world so that it can stabilize the climate. We need to make sure that what we do differently helps all people on the planet, and that all people are involved in this world and making it successful. And we obviously need to make it work for nature, because we depend on nature not just for what it does to stabilize our climate, but for our food, for fresh water, and for amazing products and important medicines and so on. And when we talk about all people, we especially mean indigenous peoples, so the people who have lived in a landscape for you know, hundreds of years, generations, who understand that landscape, have not contributed to the damage that's being felt in that landscape, and know how to best look after it, and can lead on some of that work, and their involvement and their leadership is incredibly important. So all of this needs to be done thinking about how Indigenous peoples can be part of fixing this problem and leading on those solutions. Okay, so that's the overview of the Living Planet report, and I'm going to hand over to Anna now, who's going to talk about one particular case study in the Living Planet report, which relates to her specialism. So over to you, Anna.
Hello, everybody. Just let me share my screen. Hope now it's okay. Matt, is it okay? Just give me, okay, perfect. So now let's go to one of our biggest ecosystems in the planet. So we go to the oceans. The oceans have a very special group that I really like, that are sharks and rays. And I will try to give you a glimpse of sharks and rays and try to make you understand that sharks and rays are our guardians of the ocean. But first, I'll just wanted to show you this. I don't know if anyone knows or seen this on a beach. Sometimes it looks a little bit of plastic hanging around on the beach, and people just pass through it and don't have any idea what is this. If you want to put something on the chat, if you know what is this. But I will give you the answer because we don't have so much time. So this is a mermaid purse. It's an egg case. So it's a structure that involves little sharks and these little fingers, we might say, so they are grabbed to the seaweeds of the ocean, and then when the sharks are ready, they erupt through this case, and they go starting their lives. So if you pass through one of these, remember these are egg case, and sharks or rays were living inside of those. And just to give you another, because people talk a lot about sharks, and when we talk about sharks, we always think about these huge mouths open with a lot of teeth and a lot of scary uh, animals. And people think that they are very villains and they attack people. But I would just wanted to show you this little graphic that show you that it's more likely to be killed by a mosquito than by a shark. You see, mosquito kills 725,000 humans per year. Sharks kills, it's the last on the list. So sharks are responsible for only 10 deaths. So this is just to show you that sharks are not the villains we think. And let me show you why they are really the true guardians of the ocean. So sharks, they are around for 400 million years old. So they are much older than dinosaurs. They outpassed 5 mass extinctions. So when the dinosaurs died 65 million years ago, sharks lived. Sharks were able to survive on the ocean and to thrive. They are more than 1,200 species living in every part of the ocean, from the coastal zones to the open sea to the deep sea. They occupy a lot of different habitats, and they are protecting the ocean because they are on all of these habitats, and they fulfill what we called ecological roles. I will talk you a little bit more about this now. So, in fact, sharks are really the guardians of the ocean. And just let me show you this image that shows how this is, all the sharks and rays connect with other species. So I don't know if you know the term top predator species. So sharks, it's like the lions of the savannah. It's like so these species, that the ones that are bigger and they hit the others on the food chain, they fulfill an important role, that is being the top predator species. They control the biodiversity. So they increase the biodiversity when they are on these areas, and they eating other fish, especially the ones who are a little bit more old, or they can be hill. They make sure that the populations that they feed are healthy. So they are very important, and creating an habitat, a biodiversity, a very biodiverse habitat, and a productive ocean. When sharks are not here, the animals from the bottom of chain, like the starfish or the I don't know the name in English, sorry. But for example, the starfish, they eat all the food. And when they eat all the food, all the other fishes disappear. So when sharks are present, they allow that the system is productive and in wealth, in a health, balanced health check. Now I'll show you some amazing of species of sharks and rays. Remember that there's 1,200 species on the ocean. This is the manta ray, the biggest ray of our planet, and they dwell on the open sea, going from the bottom of the sea, taking nutrients from the top of the ocean to the bottom of the sea, and then fertilizing these animals that Matt was talking about, these phytoplankton, the small animals that are the basis of our ocean. And now blue shark. Blue sharks are beautiful sharks. They are very gentle. They also live on the open sea. Unfortunately, this is the most traded shark in the world. So despite he's a migratory shark, so it travels through our ocean a lot, um, and crosses all the oceans. For example, in the Atlantic, he goes from South Atlantic to North Atlantic. And now this is the Greenland shark. This is a very special shark. You'll see this shark can live 400 years old. It's the oldest animal we know on the planet, and he only has babies with the age of 156 years old. Imagine, only have your babies with more than 100 years old. It's amazing. And this is short fin mako. This is maybe the shark like that we are used to see on the television. Now we see these teeth, but in fact, short fin mako, they live also on the open sea, and they are the fastest shark on the ocean, but they feed on other small fish. This is some of the species that dwell on our ocean, just to give you a glimpse of them. And now let's go for the real scary shark and ray facts. So now more than 1/3 of the species on our planet are threatened. For these pelagic species I've shown you, like the manta ray, the short fin mako, the blue shark, they decreased 71% since the 1970s. So in 50 years, we lost almost 3/4 of the sharks and rays of our oceans, on the open oceans. And unfortunately, we now are fishing. This is just an estimation. We are fishing 100 million sharks per year. So it takes 190 sharks and rays are fished per minute. And these creatures, sharks and rays, because they are very old, they don't reproduce very rapidly. Sometimes they only have children every 3 years. You see the Greenland shark, he only has pups with 156 years. So they cannot handle too much fishing. When we are fishing more and more, we go more onto the open sea, to the deep sea, and catching a lot of these sharks and the small sharks, they didn't have the time to reproduce. So this is causing the sharks and rays population, there is very steep decline. And now this is the second most threatened group of species in our planet. So just talk you a little bit about sharks and rays of Portugal, where I work and live, and where this WWF is based also in Portugal. So in Portugal, we are very close to the Atlantic, and people, if you ask a Portuguese, they won't tell you that there's sharks in their waters. But in fact, there's 110 species of sharks in Portuguese waters. So it's around 8% of the species in the world. It's happened in Portuguese waters. But unfortunately, more than 40% are threatened. Portugal is the third largest catcher of sharks and rays in Europe after Spain and France, and is the second largest exporter of shark meat and the sixth importer of ray meat. So we catch sharks and then we sell them through different parts of the world. It's a global trade. There's a lot of shark meat, shark fins. Shark fins are the most common thing that when we talk about sharks, we usually remember the shark fin soup, but there's a lot of different products, and meat is getting very, very I would say more people eat shark meat now than they were 40 years ago. And let's just go through these main threats. Why the sharks and rays are disappearing from our ocean? So because we are fishing more and more, for some populations, we are reaching the overfishing. So we are fishing too much. if we are fishing more than species can handle. And then also, because fishing methods were not designed to exclude sharks and rays, we are catching sharks and rays accidentally. So while we are searching and fishing for example, tuna or swordfish, we catch sharks. And sharks are very sensible. And when they are brought on board by fishermen, a lot of them are already dead. So that's why we are catching a lot of sharks and rays, and they are declining a lot because of this overfishing and bycatch. And also because we there's a continuing and growing demand for shark products. Shark products could be the gills, the skin, the teeth, the fins, the liver, the very different organs. Here you can see the gills of the manta ray. They are they are a delicacy in some countries. And there's a global trade. There's a global trade of these products. So sharks and rays are fished, for example, here in the Atlantic, and then they go to the land and they are processed, they are fresh, they are frozen, they are dried, they are cut, and then the different parts of sharks and rays go through different parts of the world. For example, 50% of the fins go to Hong Kong, but the majority of shark meat goes, for example, to Italy. And this is very difficult to trace. We don't know where the sharks and rays are going because they are so processed in different countries until they reach the final destination that we lose track of what the species we are eating. And sometimes we are consuming endangered species. And also because sharks are really not a priority for fisheries managers. Or swordfish are much more valuable fishes, so they get more attention. Sharks and rays don't. And that's why we are now talking a little bit more sharks and rays, because they are very, very important. So again, where do we find these shark and ray products? So everywhere. We can find them in restaurants, in supermarkets, in fish markets. Here you can see they are used for decoration purpose. You see the heads of a short fin mako being sold on the handcrafters market. And there's a lot of ingredients that they are taken from sharks, for example, shark liver oil or squalene, and they are put in moisturizers and makeup, in food supplements, even in pet food. So please try to check the ingredients and see if there's shark liver oil or squalene, and try to reduce the consumption of these products, because sharks and rays are much more important on the sea. So what do we need to do to change the situation and try to protect the guardians of the ocean? We need to work on an holistic approach, because sharks and rays are fished by fishermen, but then they are traded, they are sold, they are processed. So we have to work with authorities, with fishers, with retailers, even with researchers, business and consumers, to get better data and understand what's going on. And we also have to stop the bycatch. Even if we cannot change completely the way we fish, we have to try to think about ways to don't catch so many sharks, because we can do some adaptations to the fishing gear to stop the killing of sharks and rays. And also, if we improve the traceability, if we improve the checkpoints of the global trade, we could stop the sale of endangered species. Some species are almost disappearing. We cannot handle to lose them. And we need to start to recover species, stop the degradation and start the recovery, protect the habitats they need, and tackle climate change, because sharks and rays are also very important to tackle climate change. Now I'm almost finishing, and I just wanted to give you some a phrase that I really like, because if we don't know the species, we don't want to protect them. And we hope Matt and I were able to to give you a glimpse on what are these amazing planet we live on, and that we depend not only of our side humans, we depend also on the nature, we depend on the ocean, we depend on the species that live there. So show some love for sharks and rays. Let's protect these guardians of the ocean. Please check our work on WWF on Sharks and Rays initiative, and then our work in Portugal, also on oceans and fisheries. And thank you a lot to listening to us. And I'll stop sharing my screen. I will hand over again to Matt.
Thanks so much, Anna. Before I sort of take the screen again, there's a few questions about sharks, which I think, or about ocean ecosystems, which would be fantastic to just get your thoughts on. So one was, I think you might have mentioned in passing, the most endangered of the sharks and rays. But yeah, are they sort of among the most endangered fish in the ocean, or are there any other notable species?
So sharks and rays are now the second largest group of animals with more species that are in risk of extinction. For example, we have the oceanic whitetip that lost 95% of the population in the last year, so it's almost gone on the ocean. We have also the whale shark. The whale shark was very was very fished by this, because he's the biggest shark on the ocean. He is the biggest fish on the ocean. He has a very big fin, and in past years, now he's protected. We cannot fish whale shark anymore, but in past years, there was a lot of fishermen that were going after the whale sharks to take off the fin, because it was very, very valuable. Now it's protected, is recovering a little bit, but still is one of the species that needs our protection. There's some of the examples. Also the short fin mako. Now we cannot fish more short fin mako on the Atlantic, because the population dropped almost 50%. 40% of the population are now gone in 50 years. So there's a lot of cases of declines, but there are some also success stories.
Thank you, Anna. And one last question before I wrap us up. There's a few questions here from NIDA and some people who haven't put their names, about how scouts and young people might be able to do something to help in this sort of fight to save the sharks. Have you got any advice?
So I think the first thing is to spread the word. First, we need to change the image we see sharks. We think they are villains and they are bad, but actually they do a lot for our oceans. So even if we change the way we see sharks, if we start to have to see how important they are, then also the other groups, the politicians, the other groups will see that sharks are really important. So this is the first thing, I think, just to spread the word that sharks are our guardians of the ocean. And then be a responsible consumer. Check the labels before you buy anything. At this stage, we cannot assume that the fishing of sharks is sustainable. So until it is sustainable, we should reduce the consumption of sharks meat, and also these products, the ingredients like the squalene and the liver oil. So as consumers, we can reduce our consumption and get informed about sharks and spread the word that they are our guardians.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm just, if possible, we'll come back to another couple of questions before the end, but I just wanted to pick up on that sort of question of what we can do, or what Scouts can do. And so not just about sharks and rays, but obviously sometimes it's really helpful to just focus on what this looks like in practice for one ecosystem or one species. So that was just a really helpful insight from Anna. But there's some things that we can think about doing differently and doing to help nature, which sort of think about that whole global issue. So one is, Nana just started to talk about this, is make informed choices. So that's a really broad thing to say, because there are so many things to think about, unfortunately. And wildlife organizations like WWF are really trying to make it easier for people to make informed choices. So you might have heard about squalene for the first time on this call, but now that's something you know that actually, if you see that on the ingredient list for shampoo, that actually that's an animal product, and that's not a that's not just something which we're making and then using, and it doesn't affect the natural world. It actually is drawing on a natural resource. So one of the other good examples is palm oil, of course. If you know that something has palm oil in, palm oil farming is one of the major threats to the Amazon rainforest, because rainforest is cut down, palm oil is grown on that lovely rich soil that the rainforest has created, but then it doesn't last, and then they just cut more forest down and grow more. Now you can get sustainable palm oil that has not been grown in that way, palm oil that's only been grown on land that was already non-forested, but you need to look for something that says on the packaging that it's sustainable, and otherwise it probably isn't. So there's all these things that we can think about in the way that we buy things, and it might not be that you're responsible for buying all these things, but it can just be raising the awareness of people around you as to what that actually means. The other thing we can all do, and I know a lot of scouts do this already through the Million Hands Project and through other work, is to speak up for nature. And Anna said, it can be as simple as just changing people's understanding of, sharks, that they are actually really important. They're not something to be afraid of. They're something to protect. But we can also sort of speak up around things like the CBD COP, a big UN event that's coming up, which is all focused on how we are going to look after our biodiversity. Now, decision makers go into closed rooms and they have these really big discussions, but ultimately they are the governments of countries. Most of them are elected, and so they will have to listen if there is a huge call from the people that they are representing, to think about a particular issue or to take a certain action. And so we can influence just by making sure that we are raising the profile of these issues and showing that we care about protecting wildlife and wild places. If you're getting to that stage when you're starting to think about what you might do when you're older, I could make a big pitch for, like, come into a conservation organization like WWF, and some of you might be thinking along those lines, but it's not the only way. And whatever you're thinking of doing, whether you're thinking of being, a lawyer or a creative designer, or a filmmaker, or a politician, you can go in with an understanding of what it means for us to live sustainably. And sustainably means living in a way that we could carry on doing for years and years without destroying the natural world. And so in this case, it means understanding how some of our activities are damaging nature, and then thinking, I'm going to go in, and whatever I do, whatever industry I go into, whatever sector I go into, or maybe I'll start my own company with an idea that I have, I'm going to do it with an understanding of what works for the planet, and I won't work unsustainably or work for a company that is unsustainable. And then finally, you've heard about all of these scientists around the world who are gathering this data on wildlife populations. It's so important that we actually understand what's going on, because there's so much wildlife that we haven't even categorized. We haven't even identified different species. We live on this amazing world that's just filled with diverse life. And if we don't know what's going on in that natural world, then we can't understand the ecosystem, all those connections I talked about, and we can't identify what we can do to bring it back up and restore it and make it healthy. So you can actually help with this. There's an app which many of you may have used if you've been part of the Million Hands project, which is the Seek app that was developed by WWF with iNaturalist. It's a free app. You can have it on your phone or your parents' phone, and you can use this to just identify any living thing. So you scan over a plant or an animal or a bug, and it will tell you what it is, what species it is. And then you can record that in the app and actually submit it to a global biodiversity database. So that's something we can all be doing in our local landscapes, the ones that we are best placed to watch over and to study, and we can help scientists understand what's going on in the natural world. And that's the kind of thing which helps things like the Living Planet report actually come up with the solutions. Okay, so we're out of time there. So there's some fantastic questions, and I'm afraid we'll run out of time, so I'm going to have to leave them. But there's loads of information about sharks on WWF's websites, and you can access the Living Planet report and read about not just sharks but all the other biodiversity on WWF's channels as well. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Anna for a really fascinating presentation about sharks. And I think that's it for today.
Thank you for watching and all of these reactions. Thanks for this.
No, I'm not sure whether I end it. Oh wait, no, sorry, I know why.
There
we are, your challenge code. I was told this is going to be very. So the challenge code is on the screen. Just so it might not be very clear, that is a 0. So it's C0MEF. So make a note of that, and hopefully you will be able to enter that where you need it. And I'm just putting it into the chat as well. Great, thanks so much, everyone. Have a really fantastic Jyoti, and enjoy the rest of the sessions that you joined today. And thank you again, Anna.
Bye. Thank you.